There's no simple formula or shortcut in our industry. So what we have to do is start with the basic valuation, but then deviate and make adjustments for things that are unique to your facility, which could be positives or could be negatives, but they need adjustments.
You're listening to episode 134 of the Fitness Business Podcast. We'd like to thank this month's premier podcast partner, Precor, delivering industry-leading cardio, strength, functional training products and service to over 90 countries across the world. Hi everyone and welcome along to the show. I'm your host Chantal and our special guest this week is Rick Caro. Rick has been in the health club industry for 44 years as a club owner, operator, chairman of the 10th largest US club company and as a consultant of over 3,000 assignments. He runs 2 major industry events and sits on boards and advisory boards of several companies serving the club industry. Rick wrote the financial management textbook for the industry and has received every award in our industry, including being the only recipient of the URSA Lifetime Achievement Award. If you're a regular listener of the show, you will know that Rick joined us just a few weeks ago for part 1 of this interview. And today he's talking us through using a third party in the sales process, some of the challenges in selling a club. We talk about the valuation process. Rick helps us understand due diligence. And last of all, we discuss challenges around selling a studio. It's really important to note that whilst throughout both these episodes, we mostly refer to selling a club. However, many of the processes that we actually discuss can also be applied when buying a club or when buying out a partner. So make sure that you listen in to what Rick has to say. And if you need to drill down into more detail, then go ahead and download the transcription of the show over at fitnessbusinesspodcast.com. Before we move into this week's interview, here is a quick message from one of our podcast partners.
Hi, this is Jack Trummer from Precor. We deliver premium products and industry-leading service to over 90 countries across the world. If you have a club in North America, then I'd love to help you with your equipment needs. You can contact me at Precor.com or email me at jack.trummer@Precor.com. The spelling is JACK.TRUM as in mother, MMER at Precor.com. Thank you very much and enjoy your podcast.
Okay, let's transition into part 2 of my interview with Rick Caro. Why would club owners need to use a third party in that sales process?
What I do with a third party who may not be expert in the club industry to start with is I encourage club owners to either find a business friend of theirs who's local or a local business broker or real estate broker who may not know the industry at all, or their local accountant, or a local business-oriented corporate lawyer type, or a CEO of a local business who is a personal friend. And what we would do is, in effect, orient them, give them some coaching on 5 things. 1, we'd tell them how to implement the marketing. So if we're going to place an ad in the Wall Street Journal, local edition, or if we're going to write individual letters or make phone calls to owners of clubs we've designated, not necessarily in the immediate area, we would have that information and rehearse them as to how to go about that. We would tell them how to screen responses, number 2. And this is critical to make sure that people don't get access to information if they're not serious and don't meet their criteria. And he would ask what their financial resources were to make sure that they really could afford to buy the club properly. And then we would have them sign a non-disclosure agreement and make a big deal that anyone they brought in as an advisor or consultant or architect or an engineer or a accountant would also have to abide by the non-disclosure. Otherwise, there'd be real consequences. So we make a big deal of that. The third thing we teach them is how to arrange for site visits, because we don't want them to come in on their own and have control. Sometimes club owners have said, we don't want them to come in while the business is actually active. They have to come in on a Sunday night after 10 o'clock when we're closed, and I'll have a night maintenance person take them around who doesn't know anything about the club, or other kinds of situations where we really control their access to the club. We also have this person as the fourth thing they do is disseminate club materials. Remember, we talked about my suggestion of putting together materials in advance, and we either would put them online in a controlled environment, or we put them in a data room, perhaps at our accountant and lawyer's office or the businessman's office, where they go into a conference room and can look at the materials. They can't take them away. And finally, they would facilitate the negotiations. Just as I said earlier, they would have discussions, then talk to the owners, go back to the would-be buyer, and go back and forth and serve as a communicator along the way. So that's part of what a third party would do. And in many cases, not necessarily an expert in the club industry, but we can give them enough coaching to make them be very successful in that role for this purpose.
Rick, do you think that you can perhaps step us through some of the challenges that we may face in selling a club?
Sure. One of the things that we do is obviously want to minimize the rumors. So the first thing we want to do is obviously have a game plan of how we're going to deal with rumors. The second is to create an auction. We want two people to be interested at the same time because that's helpful for two reasons. One, it means that people know there's someone else looking, so they're going to behave differently. They're going to be timelier, and they're going to probably get closer to their highest price they're willing to pay earlier than they would if they thought they were the only person in the lineup. Doing proper marketing, depending on which groups we're talking about, and screening who should be contacted from the club industry, as well as creating a marketing plan for outsiders, has to be done. In many cases, people don't do it or know how to do that. Preparing all the relevant materials ahead of time, I made a big deal of that, and I just want to reiterate that again. That's a challenge because people kind of wing it and respond rather than really be preemptive and have it all ready, organized, and have the third party ready to hand it over when asked. They also, a challenge for most individuals is to have enough patience for a lengthy process. No matter what I say, I'll say it'll take 3 to 4 months. If it takes 5, they may not have the wherewithal to stick with it and say, I'm going to pull the club off the market. It's taking too long. It's too disruptive. I've lost my patience. So the challenge is to make them understand what the process is before they start, and then have them understand along the way how it's going every step of the way. Another challenge is to run your business properly at the same time. There's nothing worse than having your business start to decline and people getting current information and finding out that they were going to pay this much, but now they're going to deduct because right now the club is not operating where it was a year ago or 6 months ago because someone has taken their eye off the ball. And then just one last point. If, for instance, I was owning and operating a personal training studio, in many cases, the business is you, the principal. So if you want to stay and just be a personal training instructor only, it may have some value. But if you want to leave, often the intrinsic business without you may be worth less or be actually worthless because you were the business. And so we really have to understand what it is that's realistic when we do that valuation and understand how we're presenting that to third parties. Those are, frankly, a variety of the challenges.
Rick, I'd like to dive into some detail on this next area, and I'm hoping that you can tell us all around or all about the valuation process.
Sure. It's one of my favorite topics, and I do a lot of them for the industry of all types. And I've learned a lot because if you've done now 400, which I think is the number I'm up to, I'm a lot better than I was when I did my first 10 of them years and years ago. But generally speaking, if you go to any valuation company or any outsider, they all will tell you there are 3 general approaches to valuation. But 2 of them are rejected in this industry. The rejected ones are the cost approach and the sales comparable approach, partly because no 2 clubs are really comparable. So the one approach that is acceptable is the income approach only. And there's one method of the different types of income approach methodology, and that's the capitalized earnings method, which is based on the most recent historical information as the norm. And then what you do with that is obviously use that as a base and use industry information to figure out, based on those particular earnings, what the proper value would be. But then there are lots of adjustments that have to be made because there's no simple formula or a shortcut in our industry. So what we have to do is start with the basic valuation, but then deviate and make adjustments for things that are unique to your facility, which could be positives or could be negatives, but they need adjustments. Most owners, unfortunately, have a highly inflated view of their club's net worth. If a club happened to own their real estate, at some point they probably had to hire what is called an MAI, which stands for Managerial Appraisal Institute. These are the licensed appraisers. And the reason for that is that if they went to a bank for financing or refinancing, the bank would have their own favorite list of valuation experts, and they tell you that you can pick one. And in almost every case, they have little to no club industry experience specifically. So what they end up with are values that are overstated. This is good news, actually, for the club, because they can get a higher level of financing or refinancing, but the overall value is overstated. So as a result, if a club owner were thinking that that's what it's really worth and now was going to set himself up for a sale, he would find himself being really delusional in the sense that an actual savvy buyer would pay that much. So it's critical that the club owner initially, for stage one of the 5 phases I talked about, get an independent valuation at the outset to get that reality check. And so I make a big deal of the fact that we can waste the whole process if we're not realistic about the value right at the outset.
Rick, do you think that you could give us a definition of EBITDA?
Sure. It sounds so guttural every time I've learned how to say that and pronounce that. But in the old days, we had a thing called net operating income, NOI, and that got replaced by EBITDA. So in order to use the income approach, that the process involves a calculation of EBITDA, which stands for earnings, the E, before interest, taxes, the I and the T, interest, taxes, and that's corporate taxes, by the way, D for depreciation, and A for amortization. So it's earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. The valuation company makes lots of adjustments to the basic EBITDA because it's not a case where you're applying a cap rate or a multiple to EBITDA. It's to an adjusted EBITDA. So you start with the actual raw calculation EBITDA, and then you make adjustments. But it's a starting point, and it's the way people talk to each other, both in the industry and outside, because often EBITDA is a measure used by lots of different industries to figure out what the guts of the business is throwing off, and then they obviously make some adjustment to knowing either with a multiple or dividing by a fraction, they're the same number, of what the value would be using EBITDA as the first starting point.
You know, quite often when we're discussing this topic, Rick, we hear the term due diligence. Can you help us understand that term?
Sure. This is a term that's often used after a seller and a potential buyer agree on some basic terms of a deal, maybe even with some conditions involved. And then what the potential buyer is allowed to do is go through a process to verify the information the seller has provided. So now he gets into the detail and looks at the financials and sees how your financials were presented and might ask for backup information or wants to verify that your accountant did actually do the calculations properly. and wants to verify and maybe do some sampling that your memberships are accurate and you're really collecting what you say you are by looking at your monthly EFT, electronic funds transfer sheet that tells them how many people were billed at what amount, etc. And they might look at some expiration dates to find out if people have close-end contracts when they're ending, because they don't want to assume that if someone is, in effect, has a expiration date 1 month after the potential closing date, it's not clear they're going to have continuing dollars from that person. So they have to be realistic and understand that. And they'll look at the lease details and find out what kind of renewal periods you have and what kind of increases in rates, if any, are in the agreement. And they'll look at the adequacy of physical plant, may bring in some engineers to inspect them and see whether your heating, ventilation, air conditioning systems or electrical systems are adequate, especially if they want to intensify the use of the physical plant. And they'll look at your ancillary revenue and see what you're really paying your instructors and how many people are not just in it right now, but how many people are in those activities regularly. And then they're going to study each of the costs of doing business. So they'll look at a lot of the line items for your expenses. You get the idea. It's a whole process. And what they're trying to do is take time, sometimes several weeks, to try and verify what you've put out there as being representative of the business and make sure that that is in fact true. And what it does for them is allow them to know at a baseline what they're buying into, so that if they want to then project what their next year or two of their business as they see it, with whatever changes they want to make, they now have confidence that their starting point is accurate. So due diligence is really important for many buyers, just to be able to make sure that they know what they're getting if they do close on the deal.
We talked earlier about the challenges in selling a club. Tell us this, what are the challenges of selling a studio?
Well, let me highlight, I think there are lots. First is, as much like a club, you want to create an auction. You really want two people involved or more are interested in buying the business at the same time, and this will create a higher price, obviously, and more urgency amongst the prospective buyers. The timing of the entire process is a challenge because, again, it's not clear, especially in the studio world, that there's any time frame of a buyer, and depending on the individual situation, and we may not have any clear threat that if they don't buy it by a certain time that the price will change or the business will be affected. The ability of a buyer, in some cases, to get his financing may be an issue. So if they're trying to find both equity and debt, and may involve, and debt might involve the SBA along the way, there could be delays, could be various things from the time they say they'll do the deal to the ability to actually close on it and make it happen, may create some real time loss. And so I'm thinking of a friend of mine right now who's trying to sell one of his clubs, and they're going through both SBA financing and a bank, and both of them are taking a longer time than the individual who's seeking their financing thought, and therefore the process of buying the club from my friend has taken much longer than either side expected, because the financing seems to be a work in progress and not clear when they'll have a due date of completion. The other thing sometimes, especially in a studio situation, is the landlord has to approve the new tenant. And they may want to do some homework and do some diligence into making sure the tenant is adequate, at least as adequate, if not more, than the previous tenant. And at the same time, the new tenant, the buyer coming in, may want to change some of the lease terms and want to negotiate. So there could be a landlord process that goes on as part of this. And then the last couple of things would be, while this is going on, the would-be buyer wants to make sure the basic business does not decrease in value during the process, as I said earlier. And again, for a sole owner who's trying to run a business and perhaps sell and doesn't have the best third party to help him, this could in effect hurt him and hurt the business because he's spending too much time being distracted, he would use the word, by the process of selling. And then finally, we need owners to have a reality check. First with the valuation, and maybe they didn't get a valuation, so they're going with their gut and maybe not with reality. And then with the whole sales process, which I mentioned several times now, can be unwieldy, lengthy, difficult, and frustrating. And so when you're a small business in particular, in some cases you let emotions or your personal feelings creep into this, and it may not lead to a proper objective process.
Thank you so much for your insights on that, Rick. Now, to finish off today, can you share with us a couple of tips to understanding club financials?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And I've spent a lot of time kind of learning financials. Although I have an MBA, what really I did was I needed to understand and had accounting courses and corporate finance courses. I really needed to understand accounting and small business. So one of the things I would urge people to do is to study an accounting course. That is, take a course, even if they do it online, or get in-depth coaching over several hours, not just a question or two, but over several hours by a club experienced person who they know in their industry, who would be someone who could really coach them and explain to them how to read financial statements, how to really create budgets, how to interpret variance analysis, things where you're comparing budget against what the actuals are. Or spending time with your club's own accountant and ask him questions. Well, why does depreciation get handled this way? And how did we handle the fact that we brought some new money in from debt or equity? And how did that go through our club? And how do we account for that? And why is this treated in a certain way? So being a great questioner goes a long way. The second thing for club financials is I'd always, as I just said, ask for backup information and how we define each item on the financial statement, and become what I call a relentless questioner. I think my accounting firm probably would have had a different nickname for me. I'd like to think it was Relentless Questioner. But I continued each month to literally go to their doorstep and say, I don't understand why you did this. And when we had 8 clubs, I had 8 sets of questions, because the clubs were all different and different stages of their life cycle and different things going on. And so I would say, well, okay, we want to grow this one and we want to expand. What are the ways we can do that in terms of financially? How do we do that? We have investors or we have bank debt, and, do we refinance, but aren't there penalties? And all of those kind of questions came up, and sometimes with a what if kind of format. But I was a really good questioner and frankly got the patience of people like accountants who spent the time to teach me and answer all those questions. The third thing in terms of a tip would be to understand the legal structure of the club, how it was financed, including the specific terms, what rights the perhaps investors have, including some investors that may be in different categories. What kind of financing have I done, and what rights they have, and how can I perhaps revise or change the financing or refinance? How do I, in effect, present my story to a third party? So if I did want to sell, what do I need to know, and what are the questions they're going to ask so I can be ready for them? So I would ask a lot of questions to really understand my numbers well, of people that I respect and would give me and have the patience to, in effect, spend time and answer them.
Rick, I just want to say thank you so much for being incredibly generous today with your knowledge and with your time. I am personally just blown away. It's been an absolute honor having you on the show today.
Well, I've enjoyed it, and I appreciate your contacting me and allowing me to hopefully be helpful to your listeners.
Are you interested in increasing your center's income and your trainer's income from small group training? Tribe Team Training is the new way to get more members engaged in small group training and paying extra. Click the Tribe Team Training link in the show notes or go to tribeteamtraining.com.au/podcast for your free formula to see how much income you can make from small group training.
Get ready for this week's bonus segment, your extra injection of information, education, and inspiration to strengthen your fitness business.
I'm excited to bring you a special industry news update. This one is for all of the FBP family in New Zealand. FitX is the must-attend conference for the New Zealand fitness industry. The event features the latest in science and business for every facet and role within the fitness industry, from facility owners through to exercise professionals. This year, the conference will be held from the 24th to the 26th of November. There's a full-day business summit for owners and managers of clubs and a half-day business summit for personal trainers. On Saturday, November the 25th, you are invited to start the day with us for our next FBP family meetup. We're going to be meeting at 5:50 a.m. at the front door of the AUT campus building. Everyone is invited to come along. We're going to go for a walk for 45 minutes, and it is a fantastic way to meet new people from the industry and to get some exercise along the way. So to register, just head over to fitnessbusinesspodcast.com, and up the top of the homepage, you'll see a link to the FitX FBP family meetup. Then later that same day, I'm honored to tell you that I'll be hosting the Women in Leadership Luncheon. And to round off the day, I'm super excited to be emceeing the New Zealand Exercise Industry Awards. It is going to be a huge day and I cannot wait. I'd love to see lots of you there, so make sure that you register for the FBP meetup at fitnessbusinesspodcast.com, and to register for FitX, the Women in Leadership Luncheon, and to buy tickets for the New Zealand Exercise Industry Awards, then go to fitex.co.nz. I'll also put a link in today's show notes.
Precore Quickfire 5.
This week's Precore Quickfire 5 guest is Frank Furness. He's an internationally sought-after sales and technology speaker and social media presenter. Frank, welcome along and thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me on the show. I'm really excited to be on it, Chantal. Thanks so much.
I am very excited too. So let's get straight into your Precore Quickfire 5 questions. Let's start by you telling everyone, why do you do what you do?
I love doing what I'm doing. I've always been in sales. I was amongst the top 0.5% of salespeople in the world, and that got me into speaking in conferences. And from sales, the natural move was going into social media, started up my own little social media company. I've got 700 videos on YouTube. So I do it because I actually love what I'm doing, and I love sharing what I learn and what I actually try out all the time.
And what's one ritual that helps you become better at what you do?
Every week I make one video and I do one article, and I use a little thing called COPE, create once, publish everywhere. I publish those all over the web, and that gets me to dominate the first page of Google.
And what's one app or system that you use to stay in control of your workload?
The one that I use most of the time is Hootsuite, because it can auto-schedule things for me, put them out at the right kind of time. I can monitor on there, and the best part is it's about $10.99 a month.
And what's one book, podcast, or blog that you'd recommend and why?
Okay, I'm going to give you 3 books because I think your listeners will enjoy these. One is called 100 Content Marketing Tips by Tomas Tarok. Another one is A World Gone Social by Ted Cohn. And the third one is Connect by Josh Turner.
I love multiple book recommendations. Thank you so much for that, Frank. We can never get enough books here on the Fitness Business Podcast. And tell us, what's the topic that you're going to focus on in your main chat with us next week?
Okay, when we listen next week, I'm going to be focusing on analyzing your competitors online. So how you can actually get to dominate the first page of Google, see what your competitors are doing, and just jump way ahead of them.
This is such an exciting topic, Frank, because I know it's going to be of interest to so many members of the FBP family. So thank you so much for joining us today on the Precore Quickfire 5.
Thanks so much, and look forward to the program next week.
Thank you for joining me for the Fitness Business Podcast. Before we finish off today, a reminder that all of the resources, links, and transcripts for today's show can be found at fitnessbusinesspodcast.com. Thank you so much to all of our partners for their support. And thank you to our foundation partner, Active Management. You can go to fitnessbusinesspodcast.com/active for a free business development ebook. That's everything for this week. I will see you next week. And remember, what you leave behind is not what's engraved in stone monuments, but what is woven into the lives of others.